My credit card setup now has a total annual fee over $1,200, and even though that's already pretty high, I do have some other annual fee credit cards that I plan to add to my setup somewhat soon. But before I do that, I want to genuinely ask myself if I'm getting too carried away with the annual fees in my setup just continuing to rise, and if maybe I would be better off with a simpler setup instead. So in this video, I'm going to discuss how the annual fees in my setup have gone up over time, some upcoming decisions that I have for annual fee credit cards like the Amex Platinum or Marriott Bonvoy Brilliant, and ultimately the specific benefits and downsides to adding more annual fee credit cards to your setup, what my ideal annual fee credit card setup would look like, and what I think yours would look like as well. So to start off this video, I wanted to provide some context for how the annual fees within my setup have increased over time. So in late 2021 is when I first started to take credit cards more seriously, and during that time, I mainly tried to focus on $0 fee cards. Back in 2021, I did have two annual fee credit cards, which were the Hilton Surpass and Alaska Airlines card, and those cards both do have higher annual fees now, but back in 2021, the Surpass card was $95, and the Alaska card was $75. So the total annual fees in my credit card setup back in late 2021 was $170. In 2022 is when I first started to get a little bit more in the weeds of annual fee credit cards specifically, so I added the Chase Sapphire Preferred at $95, as well as the American Express Gold card at $250. And then I believe this year in 2022 was when the Alaska Airlines card had its annual fee increased to $95 as well. So by the end of 2022, the total annual fee in my setup increased to $535, which again was a pretty big jump because that's up from $170 the year before. 2023 saw a lot of movement in my credit card journey as well, because my goal was to keep the velocity of my new credit card applications high. So I was basically just going from one welcome bonus, hitting that welcome bonus and spend requirement, and then going on to the next one. I added the Hilton Honors Business, which saw its annual fee increase recently as well, but the entire time that I had the card, the fee was $95. Another annual fee credit card that I added in 2023 was the American Express Business Gold card. This was a similar situation, so the annual fee increased recently, but the entire time that I held the card personally, the annual fee was at $295. Finally, the last credit card that I added to my setup in 2023 was the Marriott Bonvoy Business, which has an annual fee of $125. So by the end of 2023, the total annual fees in my setup jumped up over $1,000 to $1,050 as the total annual fee across my setup, which again was a pretty large jump up from $535 the previous year. Obviously, breaking over $1,000 in terms of the annual fees that I'm paying for my setup every year was pretty symbolic, and it kind of represents that I need to take a really hands-on approach. And I want to be careful with this slippery slope of making sure that the annual fees that I'm adding to my setup are not forcing me to use benefits and credits that fall out of my organic spending just because I feel like I need to justify those annual fees. Okay, but so far this year in 2024 has arguably been the most exciting year in my credit card journey, just due to all the major changes that has actually happened. To start with, I did actually make some strides to cut down on some of the unnecessary aspects of my setup in terms of reducing my annual fees. I did decide to cancel the American Express Business Gold card and the Hilton Honors Business, which cut $390 worth of annual fees from my setup. However, I didn't just reduce my annual fees because I did apply for some new annual fee credit cards this year in 2024 as well. To start with, I applied for the Chase World of Hyatt card, which has an annual fee of $95. Then in April of this year, I applied and got approved for the highest annual fee credit card within my setup so far, which is the Capital One Venture X that has a $395 annual fee. After that, I got the IHG Premier Business Card, which has a $99 annual fee. Then I got the Delta Business Gold Card, which actually has a $0 introductory annual fee during the first year, and then a $150 annual fee for every year after that. So technically, since I'm in my first year right now, I'm not going to count this as an annual fee towards my overall setup. So in terms of the credit cards that I added this year, the total annual fees total $589, but I was able to subtract $390 worth of annual fees from my setup as well in terms of those cards that I canceled. So if you take the difference between those two numbers, my total annual fee for my setup has increased by $199 so far this year. Since my total annual fee in my setup was $1,050 at the end of 2023, right now the total annual fee across my entire credit card setup is $1,249. If I'm being completely honest, I had no idea that the total annual annual fees in my credit card setup had risen to over $1,200. Plus the thing is, $1,200 is not where it stops in terms of utilizing my two-player setup with my wife Lucia as well. Obviously, there are a ton of benefits to a two-player setup, and I'm super grateful that my player 2, Lucia, is very willing because it allows us to supercharge the amount of value that we're getting from our credit cards. But one side effect to all of that additional value is that we do have more annual fees that we need to pay in terms of the annual fees that Lucia has in her setup as well. There is some crossover in terms of annual fees that we are both paying in both of our setups for similar cards. So the goal for the rest of 2024 and into 2025 as well is to be a little bit more conscious of this and to downgrade and downsize where there are opportunities to do so. To provide an example, both Lucia and I have had the American Express Gold card, and we've both been able to get a good amount of value from that card, but just due to some of the recent changes and the annual fee increasing even higher and some of the overall exhaustion with those credits as well, we made the decision to keep my Amex Gold card for now, but we actually downgraded Lucia's Amex Gold to the Amex Green, and then she'll be able to get value out of the Amex Green by just utilizing the clear credit. Additionally, we plan to downgrade Lucia's Chase Sapphire Preferred somewhat soon as well, especially because next year is her 4th year of having the card, so she's going to be eligible for another welcome bonus, but to do so, she needs to downgrade. We are trying to leverage and get a lot of value out of these zero-fee credit cards within Lucia's setup as well, so we utilize the Built MasterCard, the Citi Custom Cash, and the Capital One Saver pretty frequently. But of course, there's plenty of other active annual fee credit cards that Lucia has in her setup as well, such as the Marriott Bonvoy Bevy that she applied for earlier this year, which again just adds to some of the annual fee exhaustion that we're starting to have. With that context in mind, the total annual fee across my credit card setup has risen really rapidly to over $1,200, plus of course the additional fees in Lucia's setup as well. So I'm at a bit of a crossroads. There's still higher annual fee credit cards that I want to add to my setup, but at the same time, am I getting a little bit out of control and should I maybe slow down? Well, I'm going to discuss my exact thoughts on that question, but first let's get into some of those higher annual fee credit cards that I still want to add in the future. First up, the highest annual fee credit card that I still want to add to my credit card setup is going to be the Amex Platinum, which of course that card does have a $695 annual fee. So it would increase the total annual fees in my setup pretty drastically. But the reason that I want this card so much is there is a Centurion Lounge in Seattle, so the airport lounge access matches my home airport location. A lot of the credits on the card would actually match with my organic spending, and I think this card would just elevate my life and travel experiences overall. Additionally, I'm becoming more and more of a Marriott loyalist and just overall trending towards that program a lot more. So I would love to add a card like the Marriott Bonvoy Brilliant, which has a $650 annual fee sometime in the future as well. But again, similar effect, the total annual fees in my setup would increase pretty drastically. But despite that potential annual fee increase, as I travel more, I'd like to upgrade my Marriott status and I get Platinum Elite status with the Bonvoy Brilliant. And then the free night award plus the dining credit would give me substantial value. The Chase Ritz-Carlton card is also of consideration for similar reasons, so the free night award and the elevated Marriott status, but I'd likely want to make a decision to pick between the two, so the Bonvoy Brilliant or the Ritz-Carlton. I would also argue that the Citi Strata Premier is pretty essential to our two-player setup because we've been racking up Citi thank you points by utilizing Lucia's Citi Custom Cash to basically be our dedicated gas station card. But in order to take advantage of getting the highest value possible for those Citi thank you points, we need to add the Citi Strata Premier so that we can transfer out to Citi's travel partners. So for now, our Citi thank you points are just sitting in our Citi account until we add that capability. In general, that's a lot of annual fees that I would consider adding to my credit card setup. But how do I pick and choose, and how do I know which credit cards I should probably add? Well, this brings me into the next section of this video, which is going to be to discuss the benefits and downsides of adding annual fee credit cards to my setup. I'll start with the downsides first, and the first downside is pretty intuitive, which is just seeing the sticker shock of that high annual fee. Obviously, there are so many expenses in life, like rent, groceries, and everything else, so it can be difficult sometimes to unnecessarily add to that, since credit card annual fees are not necessarily mandatory expenses. Then another layer to those high annual fees is that there are more things that you need to do in order to make sure that you're getting the necessary value to justify those annual fees. This may take form in utilizing different benefits, so like elevated statuses, airport lounge access, and different benefits and credits as well. But overall, I do really understand the argument for wanting to have a simpler credit card setup and in general, just being able to turn your credit card setup onto autopilot. And the reality is, the more annual fees that you add to your setup, the higher the chance that you'll forget to use certain benefits or credits, potentially feel some exhaustion or become overwhelmed, developing statement credit or benefit fatigue. Now, even though having a really high annual fee number next to your credit card setup doesn't always feel great, there can be some benefits to adding annual fee credit cards as well. For example, the Amex Platinum has a $695 annual fee, which on paper would have a pretty negative effect of dramatically increasing my total annual fees. But the Amex Platinum would be a card that I would feel pretty confident in getting more value than that $695 annual fee when you consider that I'd be able to maximize the digital entertainment credit, the Uber credit, the hotel credit, and the Clear credit. Then I would frequently take advantage of the airport lounge access as well, since again, I have a Centurion lounge at my home airport in Seattle. In my opinion, the annual fee doesn't really matter as much, but instead it's more important to put an organic monetary value next to every benefit or credit. And if you're getting enough value to offset the annual fee or more, then that credit card is worth it for you. So in my situation, it would actually be really beneficial to add a high annual fee credit card like the Amex Platinum, since I'm confident that I'd organically get more value than the annual fee. So I'm actually in a way making more money on the card. So this leads me into what my perfect annual fee credit card setup would look like, and if I would ever reach a breaking point with my annual fee just getting too high. To answer the second part of that question, I don't think there's a specific number in terms of annual fee that would be a breaking point, but instead it would be more important to just look at what my life circumstances were looking like at the time. As an example, I briefly mentioned this earlier, but my goal for every annual fee credit card that I add to my setup is to put an organic numerical value next to every benefit or credit. And if that value adds up to more than the annual fee, then it's worth it for me to add that credit card to my setup. However, I just need to be really in tune with my travel and spending preferences and adapt which credit cards I get based off of that, because I'm fully aware that those preferences can change over time. So I need to be checking up on myself and where I'm at to make sure my setup still works for me. And then another consideration that I would want to have with my own annual fee credit card setup is where I'm at in terms of how much of a hands-on approach that I want to take. And again, some of that can play into what my life circumstances look like as well. But similar to myself, I do have a couple factors that you can utilize to determine what your perfect annual fee credit card setup would look like as well. Specifically, I think there are two tests that an annual fee credit card needs to pass before you determine that you should add it to your credit card setup. First, again, you want to make sure that you're getting net positive value in terms of the value from the benefits and credits outpacing the annual fee. So as an example, maybe you're traveling a lot for work, and so certain travel credit cards would make a lot of sense for you. And then maybe you're at another life stage where you have a couple of newborns and you're trying to save a lot of money. And so a simpler credit card setup with more cash back cards would make more sense. It's totally fine if you want a simpler credit card setup or whatever credit card setup would make the most sense for you. You just want to be honest with yourself on where you're truly at. And if you want to have some more insight into which credit cards that you should add to your setup, then go watch this video next where I ranked every single credit card that I personally have, so you can have a better idea of which ones are actually worth it. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Peace.